Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into something really quite remarkable. It's a development that could genuinely reshape healthcare access across the globe.
That's right.
We're looking at a major breakthrough in blood diagnostics coming out of McGill University right here in Canada. And our mission today, well, it's to unpack how this seemingly simple 3D printed device could put vital health information into people's hands, basically anywhere.
Yeah.
We promise you a shortcut to being really well informed on this, maybe even with a few surprising facts along the way.
And what's so exciting, I think, is that this isn't just a small improvement. It really does set the stage for a profound shift. It challenges the whole traditional model,
Yeah.
The big centralized labs we usually rely on for tests. This brings the lab essentially right to the patient's side.
Right, bringing the lab to the patient. That's a powerful idea. So let's dig in. What exactly is this innovation? Why is it such a potential game changer?
All right. So at its core, it's the world's first 3D printed microfluidic device. They call it a lab on a chip. And it's specifically designed for blood diagnostics.
Okay.
It comes from researchers at McGill University in Montreal. They announced it back in October 2024.
And visually, what are we talking about?
Just imagine something about the size of a credit card.
Wow.
Yeah, but packed inside that tiny space is, well, basically the capability of a much larger lab setup.
So it handles everything, the sample, the mixing.
Exactly. Sample handling, mixing it with the necessary chemicals, the reagents, letting the reactions happen. It's all integrated onto that single small chip. It's a miniaturized diagnostic process.
That's really incredible. And you said 3D printed. Now, my first thought goes to accessibility. Are we talking high-end industrial printers or?
No, and that's the amazing part. This is where it gets really interesting, accessibility-wise.
Uh-huh.
It's made using a standard, off-the-shelf, consumer-grade 3D printer.
Seriously? Like the ones people might even have at home?
Pretty much, yeah. And it takes less than 30 minutes to print one.
Under 30 minutes. That's incredibly fast.
It is. Think about what that means for production. Quick, easy, low cost. It really lowers the bar for making these kinds of advanced diagnostics available.
So no need for complex, expensive manufacturing facilities.
Yeah.
Just a regular 3D printer. That's
Yeah.
quite something. You also mentioned something about customizable detection zones.
Yes, exactly. And tied into that is the core mechanism, which is just ingenious. It uses capillary-driven flow.
Capillary flow, like how water moves up a narrow tube.
Precisely. So the blood sample just moves through the tiny channels on the chip naturally, pulled by capillary action.
Which means?
No pumps needed, no electricity, no batteries, nothing external to make it work.
Okay, hold on. No power required at all.
None. That makes it incredibly robust and perfect for use out in the field, remote clinics, disaster situations, places without reliable power.
That's a huge factor for deployment. And the customizable zones you mentioned.
Right. That means you can configure the chip to test for different things simultaneously, different biomarkers.
Biomarkers, like the specific signals in your blood for different conditions.
Exactly. Specific indicators that can signal various health issues. So you can tailor the test for diagnosing specific diseases or maybe monitoring ongoing conditions.
Okay, so we have this accessible 3D printing, this power-free capillary flow. It all sounds revolutionary. But what's the real tangible impact on healthcare? Especially maybe for people in underserved areas.
Oh, it's potentially transformative. It just completely sidesteps the need for those big centralized labs and all the expensive machinery.
Right.
And it's not just about saving money, though that's significant. It's about overcoming huge infrastructure challenges.
Like in regions that just don't have labs nearby.
Exactly. It could leapfrog decades of infrastructure development, essentially democratizing access to vital health information almost overnight.
That's a powerful idea. Can you compare it to how things work now?
Sure. Think about a standard blood test, like an ELISA test, which is common for detecting antibodies.
Okay.
Those can take hours, sometimes longer, to get results. Plus, you need trained technicians, specialized lab equipment, the whole logistical chain.
Right. Sending samples off, waiting.
Precisely. This 3D printed chip, though, it can deliver results in minutes. Maybe up to an hour for some tests, but still incredibly fast compared to the old way.
Minutes.
It completely changes the equation for speed and access.
So for you listening, what this translates to is the real possibility of mass-producing these tests incredibly cheaply compared to current methods.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm picturing it, healthcare worker in a really remote area. Instead of waiting days or weeks for lab results, they could potentially print a test right there, on demand.
That's the vision.
Or think about widespread self-testing becoming feasible. or rapid deployment in disaster zones for quick triage, or even just routine health checks in places where labs are, well, just not an option.
It opens up so many possibilities. But, it's important to ask why this specific development is being called a global first for Canada. There are other lab-on-a-chip ideas out there.
Good point.
Yeah.
What makes this one stand out?
Well, there are a few key distinctions. First, it's the first documented case of a 3D printed device like this that's specifically designed for actual blood diagnostics intended for clinical or field use, not just lab experiments. And it was developed entirely in Canada.
So it's built for the real world from the start.
Right. And second, unlike a lot of prototypes that only work under controlled lab conditions, this chip has been functionally validated using real biological samples for real-world health applications.
Like what?
They've specifically tested it successfully for detecting COVID-19 antibodies. That proves it works in a practical, clinically relevant setting.
Okay, so it's been proven effective. What else?
And third, that rapid production we talked about under 30 minutes on a standard printer, that's not just fast, it's a validated production method for these diagnostic chips.
Unlike earlier attempts that needed special equipment.
Exactly. Many earlier concepts required things like clean rooms or proprietary, expensive machinery, which really hinders mass production and deployment. This bypasses that.
Makes sense.
And finally, that no external power needed feature, that is truly monumental.
Because it makes it genuinely field deployable.
Absolutely. No battery, no outlet, no generator required. That makes it critical for humanitarian aid, disaster response, remote rural healthcare. Anywhere electricity is unreliable or just absent. It's the combination of all these things, the design, the validation, the rapid accessible printing, and the power-free operation that makes it uniquely ready for impact.
That really paints a clear picture of why it's such a significant step forward. It's not just theory. It's practical, proven, and ready. Okay, so we understand the how and the why it matters.
Yeah.
Where could this technology go? What are the applications?
Oh, the potential applications are incredibly broad. This really could help usher in an era where diagnostics are much more decentralized, much more personalized, bringing that health information closer to everyone.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Our source material actually lists quite a range. For infectious diseases, obviously things like COVID-19 antibodies, but also Zika, dengue, the flu. Then there's chronic care. Imagine monitoring diabetes markers or kidney function, maybe tracking cardiovascular biomarkers easily at home or in a local clinic.
Big implications there.
And reproductive health, too, tracking hormones like HCG for pregnancy or LH, progesterone. And thinking about emergency situations.
A huge potential.
Rapid triage testing in disaster zones, quick checks in rural clinics without sending samples away. It could even be useful for military field medicine or maybe even space travel, where you definitely don't have a lab next door. Seems like the list just keeps going.
It really does. And this Canadian innovation puts the country in a very strong position, right at the forefront of this move towards personalized, decentralized diagnostics.
And this is a growing field, right?
Absolutely. If you look at the broader market, what's called point of care, or POC, testing, it's already a huge market, and it's projected to grow significantly, potentially reaching over $75 billion by 2030.
Wow.
And this technology, because it's so accessible and low cost, could make participating in that market and benefiting from it possible in areas that have just been left out previously.
So it's poised to make a real impact. What are the next concrete steps then? How do they get this from the lab at McGill into widespread use?
They have a pretty clear roadmap laid out. First, they need to go through formal clinical trials and get regulatory validation, like from Health Canada. That's crucial.
Makes sense. Standard procedure.
Right. Then they're working on establishing protocols for mass manufacturing, specifically aiming for deployment in those rural and low-resource settings we talked about.
Getting the production scaled up.
Exactly. And critically, they're looking at integrating it with smartphone apps.
For reading the results?
Meeting results, yes, but also potentially reporting data, maybe linking into telehealth systems, making it really user-friendly and connected.
Smart.
And finally, they're actively looking for partnerships with NGOs, with governments, to help roll this out effectively in the regions that need it most.
So really pushing for that global access.
Yeah, it suggests a real strategy to shift how diagnostics are delivered, possibly disrupting, the traditional dominance of large, centralized labs.
Okay, so let's try and wrap up our deep dive here.
Yeah.
The main takeaway seems clear. This 3D printed lab on a chip from McGill isn't just some neat gadget. It feels like a potential paradigm shift.
I think that's fair to say.
It's about changing how and where essential blood diagnostics can happen. Taking these complex processes, shrinking them down onto a tiny chip that you can print in minutes, that needs no power.
Yeah.
It really holds the promise of democratizing access to tests, cutting healthcare costs dramatically, and genuinely empowering communities, maybe even individuals, with immediate health
It
insights.
does. And, this Canadian breakthrough really sets a global example. It shows how innovative technologies like 3D printing and microfluidics can fundamentally change medicine's future.
A final thought for our listeners.
Just perhaps consider the broader implications. What does this level of accessibility mean for your own health autonomy in the future? Or how might truly decentralized medical testing reshape health equity on a global scale? It suggests a future where critical health information might just be a simple, quick test away for everyone.